Hello, my friends. Welcome back. Like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the next video.
I should have stayed home. I really should have. But I convinced myself it was just another camping trip, a weekend in the Appalachians to escape the city, clear my head, and feel alive. My friend Danny and I hiked in mid-afternoon, carrying everything we'd need for 2 nights. The forest was thick, alive with the scent of pine and damp earth, the kind of smell that makes your chest tighten in a good way. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. Not peaceful quiet, but wrong quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing except the wind brushing through the trees. We found a small clearing near a creek and set up camp. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the rocks, making them look like dark pools of liquid. We joked about the shadows at first. "It's just the angle of the sun," Danny said, but I wasn't convinced. Night fell quickly. We built a fire, roasted hot dogs, and stared into the flames, telling stories. Around midnight, I woke to something brushing against the tent. At first, I thought it was an animal, but then I heard my name. Not a whisper, not a shout, my exact name, soft and deliberate, coming from the tree lean. "Danny," I hissed. He rolled over. "What? Did you hear that?" He shook his head. "Probably just the wind." I didn't believe him. By morning, the forest had changed. The creek curved differently. Rocks were in places they hadn't been before, and the trail back seemed gone. We tried to hike out, but every turn, every ridge led us deeper into unfamiliar territory. Landmarks we had passed earlier had vanished, replaced by twisted trees and strange, moss-covered rocks. My compass spun, useless, and my phone refused to pick up a signal. That evening, we stumbled upon a clearing I hadn't seen on any map. In the center was a stone circle, black and slick, arranged like an altar. A low hum seemed to vibrate from it, deep in my chest. Shadows pooled around the edges of the clearing, stretching toward us, bending unnaturally. Danny stepped forward, curiosity stronger than fear. "What is this?" he asked. "Don't," I warned. He ignored me. The moment his fingers brushed one of the stones, the forest seemed to inhale. Shadows surged forward, thick and liquid, pressing against the edges of the clearing. Whispers filled my head, chanting, "Come, see, join." I tried to grab Danny, but he froze, eyes wide, unblinking. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. The forest twisted around us. Trees bent like they were alive. Shadows pressed against the air itself. And I realized we were not in the world we had entered. The next moments were a blur. I ran blindly through the trees, branches tearing at my clothes, roots tripping me, until I stumbled into the creek near our campsite. The stone circle was gone, Danny was gone, and everything appeared normal. Too normal. I searched for hours, calling his name, but it was as if he had never existed. I returned home alone, shaken, but convinced I could put it behind me. Weeks passed. I tried to return to normal life, but shadows moved differently in my apartment. Reflections showed figures at the edge of my vision. At night, I dreamed of the stone circle, the black stones pulsing under my fingertips. Then the stone appeared. Not in my tent, not in my pocket. It appeared on my bedside table one morning. Smooth, black, warm, pulsing faintly. And the whispers returned, soft, patient, insistent. "Come, see, join." I tried to ignore it, to throw it away, but the pull was irresistible. Every night, I feel the tug stronger, guiding me, whispering secrets I can almost understand. And I realized the truth. The forest didn't just claim Danny because it wanted him. It wanted me next. The Appalachian Mountains are beautiful, majestic, inviting, but they are patient, and patient things are dangerous, waiting for the right moment to claim what is theirs. Tonight, as I sit here writing this, I can feel the pull stronger than ever. I know I will return, not as a victim, not screaming, not running. I will walk into those mountains willingly, carrying the stone, joining the forest, and becoming something that waits. Patient, eternal. And maybe, when the next fool ventures into those woods, I'll be there already, waiting, whispering, bending the shadows to lead them in. The forest isn't done with me, and it never will be. I've always loved the outdoors, or at least I thought I did. There's a certain satisfaction in hiking through the Appalachians, in watching the sun sift through towering oaks and maples, in smelling the wet earth after a storm. That was before the trip that made me reconsider every instinct I'd ever trusted in the woods. It started as a simple plan. My buddy Jason and I had mapped out a 3-day camping trip in a remote section of the Appalachian Trail, far from main roads, far from anyone who could hear a scream. The drive-in was long, the kind of winding mountain roads that force you to focus so hard that the world outside your windshield disappears. By the time we parked, dusk had settled in, a gray-purple haze over the peaks. The campsite was perfect, or at least it seemed so at first. A small clearing, enough space for our tent, a little creek running nearby, and thick forest surrounding us on all sides. We pitched the tent quickly, laughing at our clumsy coordination, the kind of laughter you tell yourself is brave when it masks a small fear of being utterly alone. The first night passed quietly. We had a small fire, roasted some sausages, and told stories. Nothing scary, just the usual tales of past misadventures. But sometime after midnight, I woke up. At first, I thought I was dreaming. There was a faint smell, like something burnt mixed with wet leaves. Then I heard it, a whisper, so faint that I thought it had come from my own mind. But when I nudged Jason awake, he heard it too. "I think someone's out there," I said. My voice sounded ridiculous even to me, high-pitched and uncertain. Jason shook his head. "Probably an animal. Just don't move too much." But it wasn't an animal. The whispers came again, more insistent, drifting on the night air in a pattern too deliberate to be random. Then came the movement, shadows flitting between the trees, too fast to identify, too quiet to track. My heart started hammering. We grabbed our flashlights and stepped out, trying to convince ourselves we'd seen nothing. But then we did. Marks on the trees, jagged scratches in the bark, fresh footprints in the mud, long and narrow, with toes that bent at odd angles. I wanted to laugh, to shake it off as some prank, but even Jason went quiet, staring at the ground like he couldn't believe what he saw. "Let's just go back to the tent," he whispered. I agreed, though some irrational part of me wanted to follow the footprints, to see where they led. We made it back, but the whispers didn't stop. They circled our tent, soft, persistent, forming words we couldn't understand. Morning brought relief, if only because daylight tends to make fear manageable. But as soon as we began packing our gear, we realized something was off. Our backpacks had been moved, not far, just enough to be unsettling, and small things were missing. Our map, a bottle of water, a pocket knife. Items we would have noticed instantly if someone had taken them deliberately. But there was no sign of a person, no footprints except our own. Jason tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was kids, he said. Hikers messing with us. I didn't believe him. The woods felt wrong, alive in a way that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. We decided to hike out early, following the trail we had used to enter, but the forest seemed to shift. The landmarks we had memorized, the twisted pine, the moss-covered rock, the creek bend, none of them were where they should be. The trail curved in impossible ways, as if the forest itself had rearranged while we slept. By late afternoon, we were lost. Our GPS had no signal. Our compass spun erratically. Panic began to creep in. Jason tried to stay calm, suggesting we climb a ridge to get a better view, but the higher we went, the stranger it got. The trees were thicker, darker, their shadows too dense. Mist curled around the trunks like fingers, and I could swear I saw figures standing just beyond our vision, retreating when I looked directly at them. And then we heard it, a deep, resonant hum, vibrating through the earth beneath our feet. It wasn't music, it wasn't language, it was something older, something that didn't belong in the realm of humans. It made my teeth ache, my bones thrum. Jason froze. "Do you hear that?" "Yes," I said, my voice trembling. It's coming from down there." I pointed toward a depression in the earth, barely noticeable under the thick undergrowth. A small hollow, like the mouth of a cave, hidden among rocks and ferns. Against my better judgment, we approached. The hum grew louder, vibrating through our shoes. The smell hit again, wet iron, decay, something acidic and sour. The hollow wasn't deep, maybe 15 feet, but shadows pooled inside as if the darkness itself had weight. And then we saw it. Eyes. Thousands of tiny, glowing eyes scattered across the walls of the hollow, blinking slowly. Shapes pressed against the darkness. Limbs bent in ways no animal should move. The whispers rose again, forming words I could almost understand. "Stay, stay, stay." Jason grabbed my arm. "We leave. Now." But I couldn't move. Something was pulling me toward the hollow, a force that wasn't physical but demanded obedience. I stumbled and the shadows shifted. One shape, larger than the rest, moved forward, limbs stretching impossibly, its glowing eyes fixed on me. And then silence. I woke up hours later, lying on the trail, Jason nowhere in sight. The sun was low, the forest quiet. My pack was at my side, untouched except for one thing, a small, smooth stone in my hand. Dark, almost black, with a faint, pulsing glow beneath its surface. I didn't remember picking it up. I ran. I ran until the forest ended and the road appeared, my lungs burning, my mind screaming. I flagged down a car, told them I'd been lost, couldn't explain the scratches, the eyes, the whispers, nothing. But the stone, I kept it. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. There was something familiar about it, something that called to me when the wind blew just right. Weeks passed. I reported Jason missing, but the authorities found no trace of him. No footprints, no signs of struggle, nothing. And I started noticing things, shadows at the edges of my vision, whispers when I was alone, a tugging sensation in my chest whenever I held the stone. One night, I awoke to find the stone glowing brighter than ever. The whispers were loud now, forming words I could understand clearly. "Stay joined, see." My bedroom felt impossibly large, stretching into shadows that weren't mine. The air shimmered, and I could see faint outlines of the forest hollow, the glowing eyes, the shapes pressing against the walls, waiting. I realized then that it hadn't been a coincidence. The forest hadn't released us. It had chosen me, and I understood something terrifying. The stone was a tether. Jason hadn't disappeared. He had joined. The forest doesn't kill, not exactly. It claims. It rearranges reality to suit itself, pulling you in until there's nothing left but the hollow and the eyes and the whispering voices that speak only to the ones who remain. I left my apartment the next morning. I walked to the woods, the stone warm in my pocket, vibrating like a heartbeat. As I approached the trailhead, the whispers returned, gentle now, coaxing me forward. The forest was waiting. I stepped onto the path and felt it close behind me, the air thickening, shadows stretching. And I walked in, knowing I would not walk out. The Appalachians are beautiful, majestic, peaceful. They hide their secrets well. But if you ever see someone walking the trails alone, talking to themselves, clutching a dark stone that pulses in your hand, remember this: the forest is patient, and it never forgets. I had been looking forward to this trip for months. After a grueling year of city life, my roommate Derek and I decided to escape to the Appalachian Mountains, to a remote campsite he swore was untouched by tourists. The kind of place where the only sounds were birds, wind, and the creek running through the valley. We wanted solitude, and we got it, or so we thought. We arrived in the late afternoon, driving down a narrow, gravel road that twisted and turned through dense forest. The trees were taller than anything I'd seen outside a national park. Mist clung to the undergrowth, curling around ferns and roots like a living thing. Derek parked at a small clearing near a stream, and we began setting up the tent. Everything was quiet except for the water trickling over rocks and the occasional rustle of small animals in the brush. The first night was uneventful. We built a fire, cooked a simple dinner, and watched the smoke curl up into the treetops. The stars were unusually bright, as if the mountains themselves had cleared a window into the sky. I was the first awake. It was past midnight, and the campfire had long since burned down to embers. There was a faint movement in the darkness, just beyond the edge of the clearing. At first, I thought it was a deer, or maybe a fox, but then I saw the shadow shift, crouching unnaturally low to the ground, moving without sound. My pulse quickened. "Derek," I whispered, shaking him awake. He groaned. "It's probably just the wind." "No," I said. "Something's out there." He finally sat up, squinting into the black. "Okay, I see it." His voice was tight. "That's not right." We grabbed our flashlights and scanned the perimeter. The forest looked ordinary at first, but then I noticed the trees. Their bark was scratched and gouged in long vertical marks, jagged and fresh. Small footprints led from the tree line toward the creek, elongated and uneven, like nothing I'd seen before. We tried to follow them, but they stopped abruptly in a circle around a particularly old oak. Around its base, the earth was churned and bare, and dark stains suggested something had been dragged. I felt an unease settle in my stomach, heavier than anything I had ever felt in the woods. We returned to the tent, adrenaline fading into anxious exhaustion. Sleep came fitfully. I dreamed of eyes, hundreds of them, peering at me from the forest, blinking in unison, unblinking when I tried to look closer. I woke to the sensation of being watched, even in the safety of our small tent. The next morning, we decided to hike. We thought a change of scenery would calm us down, but as soon as we left the clearing, the trail felt wrong. Landmarks we had memorized, boulders, fallen logs, creek bends, were slightly shifted, as if the forest had rearranged itself overnight. I told myself it was my imagination, but Derek noticed too. He frowned and said, "The trail doesn't feel right. Something's off." We pressed on, following what we thought was the path back to the main road, when the fog thickened and the trees seemed to close in. The whispers began then, low, unintelligible murmurs drifting through the mist. I froze. Derek did too. They were too deliberate to be wind, repeating in patterns that felt almost conversational. We tried to ignore them, but they grew louder, circling us from all directions. Then we saw them, shapes moving just beyond the fog, hunched thin impossibly fast. I couldn't make out faces, but I could feel their eyes on us, bright and reflective. The whispers formed words we could almost understand. Stay, stay, stay. Panic set in. We turned to run and realized we were walking in circles. Every tree, every rock looked the same. The trail we thought led out had vanished. Our compass spun wildly. Our GPS refused to signal. Fear clawed at my chest. Hours, or maybe minutes, time had lost all meaning. We stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. Its windows were dark, the wood rotting and warped. Derek hesitated. "We should keep moving," he said, voice tight. But I was desperate. I needed somewhere to hide. Inside, the cabin was empty, but smelled of damp wood and something metallic. I noticed symbols etched into the walls, crude and angular, forming patterns that felt familiar and wrong at the same time. The floor was littered with old stones, arranged in a rough circle. My heart sank. A shadow moved across the doorway, not outside but inside. Something crouched low, limbs bent in impossible ways. Eyes glowed faintly, reflecting our flashlight beams. It hissed, not like an animal, but like air being sucked through a narrow slit. And in that hiss, I could swear I heard a name. My name. Derek grabbed my arm. "We can't stay here." But we didn't have a choice. The creature didn't approach, it simply waited. We backed into the corner, breathing shallow, the shadows pressing closer. The whispers returned, louder now, almost chanting. And then the floor beneath us shifted. Not the wood, the earth itself. The cabin was hollowing, sinking slowly, inexorably. Panic surged. We bolted out the back door and ran blindly into the fog. I could feel something brushing past us, cold and clammy, tugging at our clothing, whispering promises and threats all at once. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but the forest seemed endless. And then, just as abruptly as it started, it stopped. We burst into a small clearing, dew-soaked and quiet. The cabin was gone. The shadows were gone. The forest was ordinary again. We didn't speak as we ran until we reached the main road, exhausted and disoriented. Cars passed. The world outside the mountains resumed normally. We tried to explain what happened, but who would believe us? Authorities found no trace of the cabin, no footprints, nothing. Only a small, black stone I had picked up in the clearing remained in my pocket. Smooth, warm, almost alive. We left the mountains immediately. Derek swore he would never return. I promised the same, but nights later, I realized the stone was pulsing faintly. It hummed beneath my palm, like a heartbeat, a tether calling me back. Weeks later, I awoke in the middle of my apartment to see the forest creeping through the windows. Not real, not fully, but visible. Trees pressed against walls, shadows crawling along the ceiling, whispers curling through the air. And then I understood. The forest doesn't just exist in the mountains. It exists wherever its remnants touch. A stone, a seed, a footprint left behind. It watches. It waits. It chooses. And by taking that stone, I had chosen too. Derek didn't, but the forest didn't forget him. Sometimes I swear I see him in the shadows, just beyond my vision, running endlessly, chased by shapes only he can see. And I know, one day, The forest will reclaim me completely unless I return the stone, but the pull is growing stronger, the whispers louder, and I'm not sure I want to resist anymore. The Appalachians are beautiful, yes, majestic, but they're patient, and in their patience, they are deadly. I'd been looking forward to this trip for months. After a year of deadlines and fluorescent office lights, I convinced my cousin Mike to join me for a weekend in the Appalachian Mountains. He had a map, I had a tent, and neither of us had any idea what we were getting into. We arrived mid-afternoon and parked near a small creek where the mountains opened into a clearing thick with pine needles. The air was sharp, the kind that fills your lungs so deeply you can almost feel it in your bones. The forest looked ordinary at first, peaceful, inviting, but as we unpacked, I noticed the silence. Not the kind of quiet you expect in the woods, with birds and rustling leaves, but a heavier quiet, like the forest was holding its breath. That first night, we built a fire and roasted some sausages. The sky darkened to a deep violet, stars scattered like dust across the peaks. I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. We joked, told stories, and eventually crawled into the tent, exhausted. I woke hours later. The fire had burned out, the embers gone. I thought I heard whispering, faint at first, then louder. My flashlight revealed nothing but trees, trunks stretching into the darkness. I nudged Mike. "Do you hear that?" He stirred, groaned, and shook his head. "It's just the wind." But it wasn't the wind. The whispers formed patterns, repeating sounds too deliberate to be natural. They carried through the trees, sometimes in rhythm with something I couldn't see. I strained to listen, and then I noticed it, a figure standing just beyond the tree line. Too tall, too thin, limbs bent oddly. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark. "Mike," I whispered. He blinked toward the trees. "What the hell is that?" We tried to leave the clearing, but every path seemed wrong. Trees that were there earlier weren't. Stones had shifted. The creek ran in a slightly different curve. We realized we had no idea which way led out. The forest wasn't ordinary. It had rearranged itself, folding in on us. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning. Every so often, the whispering returned, circling us, repeating words we almost understood. Stay, stay, stay. Shadows shifted in ways that made our stomachs churn. We ran blindly at one point, tripping over roots and rocks, our lungs burning, only to find ourselves back at the same clearing where we had set up camp. The tall figure watched from the trees, never moving closer, but never leaving. Desperate, we stumbled through the fog and came upon a cave, partially hidden behind hanging vines. Inside, it was damp, with walls slick with moisture. I felt drawn toward it, though I had no rational reason to enter. Mike hesitated. Maybe we shouldn't. But I went in anyway. The cave widened into a chamber, the ceiling high and uneven. Strange symbols were carved into the rock, old, crude, yet unmistakable in their intent. In the center, a shallow pit was lined with black stones that seemed to absorb the dim light from our flashlights. The whispers were louder now, emanating from the pit, forming syllables I didn't recognize but somehow felt compelled to obey. And then I saw them, dozens of tiny shapes pressing against the walls. Not animals, not human. Limbs bent in impossible angles, eyes glowing faintly, watching, waiting. My stomach turned, my breath caught. Mike's flashlight fell on me. "Don't, whatever you do, don't touch it." But I couldn't resist. Something in me pulled toward the pit. I knelt, feeling an almost electric hum from the stones. The whispers surrounded me. Come, join, see. Mike grabbed my arm. You don't understand. It's not a place. It's alive. I tore my hand away, but my mind felt heavy, fogged. The chamber seemed to pulse, breathing, alive. I realized then that the cave wasn't just a location. It was a trap, a living entity luring us in. And Mike, he was frozen, staring at the shadows, his eyes wide and unblinking. The tall figure appeared at the cave entrance, its limbs bending in ways that defied nature. The whispers crescendoed, enveloping us. Mike screamed, and I grabbed him, dragging him toward the exit. The creature didn't follow. It didn't need to. The forest itself seemed to fold around us, the path twisting and turning. Somehow, we emerged back into the clearing. But the forest wasn't the same. The creek was gone, replaced by a shallow, stagnant pond. The clearing was smaller, trees pressed in tighter, and the air smelled of iron and decay. Mike was pale, shaking. We can't leave, he said. It won't let us. We ran again, following faint trails, but the forest resisted. Every landmark we tried to follow shifted, and the whispers never stopped, guiding us toward something we couldn't understand. Exhaustion overtook us, and we collapsed near a rock outcropping. That's when I saw it. Dozens of black stones, identical to the ones in the cave, half buried in the moss. My hand reached out before I could stop it. The instant my fingers touched one, I felt a pull, not physical but mental. Images flashed in my mind. The cave, the symbols, the shapes pressed against the walls, Mike trapped in the shadows, screaming silently. The forest wanted me. I tried to let go, but the pull intensified. It was a choice, subtle, insidious. Leave the stone and run, or take it and see. I took it. The whispers became clearer. See what you are. See what waits. The ground shifted beneath me. The forest around me warped, folding into itself. Trees elongated, shadows stretched impossibly, and I felt my body pulled into the earth. Mike tried to grab me, but his hands went through mine as if I was already slipping out of this world. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the forest closing over me, the whispers now chanting my name in harmony with the stone's pulse. I woke hours later, or maybe days. Time no longer mattered, sitting at the edge of the creek near our campsite. The sun was low, spilling golden light across the water. Mike was gone. My pack and tent were intact. No evidence of the cave, the stones, or the shadows remained. It was as if the forest had never been hostile, as if it had never existed that way at all. Except for the stone in my pocket. Smooth, black, warm, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. And every night since, I dream of the cave, the shapes, and the whispers. But here's the difference. The forest isn't trying to trap me anymore. It's waiting, patient, silent, watching. And I know one day I will hear its call again, and this time I won't resist. I return to the city, but the mountains follow me. In reflections of windows, in the corners of forest during drives home, I see shadows moving just beyond sight. I feel the tug of the stone constantly, a reminder that I belong to the Appalachians now, in a way I cannot escape. The mountains are beautiful, majestic, inviting, but they are patient and they never forget. And one day, they will call for me again. I thought I knew the mountains. Growing up in Virginia, My family had taken me hiking in the Appalachians every summer, always in daylight, always near a ranger station or a trail with markers. But this time, I was going alone, camping deep in a section I'd only heard about in whispers from old-timers in the small town near the trailhead. They called it Hollow Pine, and I've been told it was untouched, wild, and, more than once, a place people shouldn't linger too long. I ignored the warnings. The drive up was long, twisting along roads barely wide enough for one car. Mist rolled through the valleys like smoke, clinging to the trees and curling around the rocks. I parked in a small clearing near a creek, my truck's headlights catching the glint of wet stones and the sudden blackness of the forest beyond. I set up my tent quickly, eager to have light before night fell completely. The first hours passed like any normal camping trip. I made a small fire, cooked some canned beans, and admired the sky as it darkened to deep blue. The stars were brilliant, brighter than I'd ever seen in the city, and the forest smelled of wet earth and pine sap. I told myself this was just a quiet, secluded adventure, peaceful, even comforting. Then the whispers began. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe a trick of my imagination, but they were distinct, soft, and irregular, almost syllables like someone speaking too far away to understand. I froze, listening, my eyes scanning the tree-line. I saw nothing. Hello. I called, my voice too loud, too sharp. The forest swallowed it. I tried to sleep, but the whispers grew louder, circling my tent. When I finally drifted, I dreamed of the forest bending over me, branches reaching in like hands, shadows pooling in impossible shapes, eyes blinking in rhythm, hundreds of them, waiting. I woke with a start to the sensation of being watched, the fire long dead, the night thicker than before. I decided to hike the next morning, hoping sunlight would bring clarity. The trail was narrower than I expected, twisting and folding back on itself. Every rock, every fallen log seemed slightly different than I remembered passing earlier. My compass spun, my GPS refused to signal. I realized with growing fear that I had no idea which way led back. Then I saw it, a figure crouched in the undergrowth ahead, long-limbed, unnaturally thin. Its skin seemed gray in the shadows, its eyes reflecting light in a way that made my stomach turn. It didn't move toward me, but it didn't move away either. I froze, caught between curiosity and terror. "Hello," I said again. The figure tilted its head, slowly, impossibly, and then vanished. No rustle, no sound, just gone. I blinked, thinking it a trick of the light, but then the whispers returned, louder, forming syllables I could almost understand. Stay, stay, stay. I ran. The trail twisted, the forest closed in. Rocks shifted, roots rose where there had been none. Time lost all meaning. I stumbled into a small clearing and found a ring of stones, blackened at the edges as if they had been burnt. In the center, the earth was bare, churned. I noticed strange carvings on the surrounding trees, crude, jagged symbols I couldn't read, but somehow understood as warnings. I wanted to leave, but the trail had vanished. I was trapped. The whispers became voices. Low, guttural, repeating my name. Shapes moved between the trees, watching, always just out of reach. I tried calling for help, screaming, but no sound left my mouth. Panic clawed at my chest as I ran blindly through the undergrowth. Hours later, I think it was hours, I had no concept of time, I stumbled into a creek. The water was cold, bracing. I knelt to drink and saw something in the reflection, dozens of shadowy figures behind me. their limbs bent at impossible angles, glowing eyes blinking in rhythm. I turned. There was nothing. I ran until I collapsed on the forest floor, exhausted, terrified, and that's when I noticed a stone. Small, black, smooth, pulsing faintly in my hand. I hadn't picked it up. It was simply there. The whispers circled me, forming words I could finally understand. Take it. See. Become. I didn't want to. I tried to throw it, but my hand wouldn't open. The forest bent around me, the shadows pressing closer. The voices spoke in unison. We've waited. You're ours now. I felt my body pulled forward, not physically, but mentally, as if the stone was drawing me into another world layered over this one. The trees stretched and warped. The sky fractured into fragments of gray and black. I glimpsed the clearing, the burnt stones, the shapes pressed against the walls of some unseen cavern. And then I understood. This place wasn't a forest. It was alive, patient, deliberate. It didn't just exist, it claimed. I screamed, but the sound had no weight. The shadows pressed closer, and then I was somewhere else entirely. I woke on the forest floor again. Sun overhead, the clearing seemingly ordinary. The creek flowed gently. The air smelled of pine. Everything looked peaceful. I blinked, convinced I had dreamed the entire ordeal. But the stone was still in my hand, pulsing alive, and in the corner of my vision, I saw movement, shadows that shouldn't be there, curling in ways that defied physics, shapes bending around trees and rocks in impossible ways. I tried to leave the forest. I ran down the trail, but it twisted endlessly, folding back on itself. Every path led me back to the clearing, to the stone, to the whispers. I realized then that I wasn't just lost. I was chosen. The forest doesn't just trap people. It waits, it selects, and it feeds. I felt the pull of the stone growing stronger every day, guiding me, teaching me. And when night falls, I see the eyes again, blinking, waiting, reminding me that escape isn't part of the forest plan. Weeks later, I told someone I got lost. They didn't believe me, of course. Who would? But I didn't lie about the stone. It rests in my pocket even now, pulsing faintly, a heartbeat, a tether. And every time I glance at it, I feel the pull stronger, whispering to me, promising knowledge, power, and understanding if only I follow it back to the mountains. I know one day I will, and when I do, I won't be alone. The forest will welcome me, and I will become a part of it, just as it intended all along. The Appalachians are beautiful, majestic, inviting, but they are patient, and patient things are dangerous in ways you can never imagine. I had always thought the Appalachians were just beautiful mountains, peaceful trails, endless forests, the kind of place people go to escape city life. I was wrong. My friend Caleb and I had been planning a weekend camping trip for weeks. We wanted isolation, no trails marked, no cell signal, just us in the forest. We parked at a small gravel pull-off and hiked in, packs heavy, hearts light with excitement. The trail ended in a clearing by a stream, a perfect spot, at least by daylight. We set up our tent, stacked some firewood, and explored a little before nightfall. The air smelled of damp moss and pine. The creek burbled cheerfully, and the mountains glowed with the last light of the sun. We joked about being alone in the wilderness, not realizing that being alone in the wilderness is nothing like we imagined. Night came, sudden and suffocating. We built a small fire and sat near it, eating canned beans and jerky. At first, everything seemed normal, but then I noticed something odd, a shadow moving behind a cluster of pines. I waved my flashlight, but it vanished. Probably a deer, Caleb said. I wanted to believe him, but instinct told me otherwise. Later that night, as I tried to sleep, I heard whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind through the trees, but they were too deliberate, too rhythmic. My name, my actual name, was barely audible, carried on the breeze in a voice I could not identify. I shook Caleb awake. He frowned. I don't hear anything. I insisted. It's out there. Someone, or something, watching us. Caleb laughed nervously. Probably just an animal. Relax. I didn't relax. Hours passed in fitful sleep. When I woke again, I realized the forest had changed. The clearing was smaller, the creek twisted strangely, and the path we had used to enter was gone. Trees pressed in closer, their trunks thicker than before, the moss underfoot damp and spongy. The whispers had returned, louder, almost pleading, "Stay, stay." We tried to hike out. Every step we took, every landmark we tried to follow, led us deeper into the forest. Rocks shifted, fallen logs appeared in places we had already passed. The sunlight barely filtered through the canopy, and when it did, it revealed shadows where none should exist. We stumbled upon an old cabin, half collapsed, roof caving in. Caleb wanted to keep moving, but I was drawn toward it. There was something about the structure that felt alive, almost expectant. Inside, the smell was pungent, earth, rot, and something metallic. Symbols were carved into the walls, crude and jagged, forming patterns I couldn't read, but instinctively feared. In the corner, I saw a pile of stones, black and smooth, pulsing faintly in the dim light. The whispers crescendoed as I approached. I felt a tug in my chest, subtle but insistent, pulling me toward the stones. "Don't," Caleb whispered. "Just leave it alone." I reached for one anyway. The instant my fingers touched it, the forest seemed to bend. The walls of the cabin stretched upward, the ceiling breathing, pulsing with a life of its own. Shadows moved independently of light, limbs bending impossibly, shapes pressing close as if trying to escape or enter. Caleb grabbed my arm, screaming for me to let go, but I couldn't. The stone was alive, a tether to something beyond understanding. Whispers in my head urged me on. See, learn, become. Then the cabin vanished. We were back in the clearing, but not the same clearing. The forest pressed closer. The sky darkened unnaturally. The creek had become a stagnant pool. Shapes moved just beyond our vision, always at the edges, watching. The whispers were now deafening in my mind. "We are here. You belong." We ran blindly, until exhaustion forced us to stop. I could feel the forest shifting beneath my feet, pulling, nudging, guiding. I realized then that the forest wasn't just alive, it was intelligent, patient, predatory. And then I saw it. Caleb, standing rigidly, his face blank, eyes reflecting the shadows, no longer himself. He reached out, and I understood. The forest didn't just trap people. It claimed them, reshaped them into its own forms, then waited for the next. I tried to run, but I was already too late. The stone pulsed violently in my pocket, and the ground beneath me gave way. I fell into darkness, the shadows enveloping me. The whispers merged into a single voice. "Welcome home." When I awoke, I was at the edge of a familiar trail, the sun shining through the trees, as if nothing had happened. Caleb was gone. The cabin, the stones, the shapes all gone. I stumbled back to civilization, shaken, exhausted, unable to explain what had occurred. Authorities found no sign of Caleb, no trace of the cabin, nothing at all. Weeks later, I noticed something strange. In reflections, in mirrors, in windows, shadows moved slightly differently around me, stretching just a little longer than they should. At night, I dreamed of the forest, but it wasn't the same forest. It was alive, waiting. And the stone, the black stone, now pulsing faintly in my pocket, reminded me that I was tethered. I realized, slowly, with a rising dread, that the forest had not released me. I had only been allowed to leave. One day it would call again, and when it did, there would be no escaping. I would walk back into the forest willingly, carrying the stone, joining what it claimed Caleb, becoming a part of Hollow Pine forever. The Appalachians are beautiful, yes, majestic, inviting, but they are patient, and the patient do not forget. I have been looking forward to this trip for months. After a year of fluorescent office lights, traffic jams, and deadlines, I needed the mountains, their solitude, their silence. My friend Josh and I had decided to hike into the backcountry of the Appalachians, far past marked trails, into a region locals rarely spoke about, a section called Raven Hollow. The name itself made me uneasy, but Josh laughed it off, saying it added to the adventure. We parked near a shallow creek, where the forest opened into a clearing just big enough for our tents. The air smelled sharp and clean, pine and damp earth mixing with the last warmth of the day. We set up camp quickly, eager to explore the surrounding woods before dark. By evening, the forest had already begun to change. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, bending around the trunks of the trees. The creek, which had glimmered in the sunlight, reflected shapes that weren't there, dark, flickering forms that vanished when I blinked. Josh noticed too, but dismissed it as a trick of the fading light. That night, as we sat by the fire, I first heard the whispers. Low, indistinct, carried on the wind, as if the forest itself were speaking. I leaned closer to Josh. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. He frowned. "It's just the wind through the trees. Don't let your imagination run wild." I wanted to believe him, but the whispers became clearer as night deepened. They weren't words, not exactly, but they felt intentional, urgent. My name came from between the trees, soft, almost pleading. Sleep didn't come easily. When I finally drifted, I dreamed of the forest folding in on itself. Trees bent at impossible angles, shadows pooled like water, and I saw figures pressed against the trunks, countless eyes blinking in unison, all staring at me. I woke gasping, heart racing, to the sensation of unseen eyes watching from every direction. The next morning, we tried to hike out. The path we had marked yesterday seemed unfamiliar, twisted in ways that defied logic. Rocks shifted, roots rose where there had been none. Our compasses spun erratically. Our phones had no signal. Panic began to creep in. We stumbled upon a small cabin, dilapidated and leaning, almost swallowed by vines and moss. Josh wanted to keep moving, but I was drawn to it. Something about the structure seemed alive, expectant. Inside, the smell was pungent, damp wood, iron, and something sour I couldn't identify. Symbols were etched crudely into the walls, jagged lines forming shapes that triggered unease in my chest. On the floor lay a pile of smooth, black stones. They pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. The whispers rose in intensity as I approached. My mind urged caution, but my body moved toward them, drawn against my will. "Don't," Josh said sharply, grabbing my shoulder. "Just leave it." I resisted, but the stone called to me. The moment my fingers brushed it, the cabin seemed to breathe. The walls stretched upward, the shadows inside moving independently of light. Figures pressed against the walls, limbs bending in impossible ways, eyes reflecting light that wasn't there. Josh tried to pull me back, but I couldn't resist. The whispers merged into a single voice inside my head. See, become, understand. The world shifted around me, and for a moment, I felt the forest itself in my bones, patient and intelligent, alive with hunger. And then I saw him, Josh, standing rigidly, his eyes blank, his mouth opening to mimic the whispers. He was no longer himself, but a vessel for something ancient, something patient, watching and waiting for the next to fall. I ran out of the cabin into the twisting forest. Every tree, every rock seemed to pulse with life, the shadows stretching toward me, tugging at my body. The path I thought led out folded back on itself endlessly. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed, time meaningless. Finally, I stumbled onto a ridge at sunrise. The forest below looked ordinary, the creek glinting in the morning light, the cabin gone. Josh was nowhere to be found. I collapsed, exhausted, and realized I had survived, but I was not free. I returned home, but the mountains followed me. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. Corners of my apartment stretched unnaturally at night. The stone had come with me, pulsing faintly in my pocket, tethering me to Raven Hollow. And the whispers continued, soft, patient, beckoning. Then one night I understood. The forest hadn't tried to trap me before. It had tried to test me. And now it offered a choice. I could resist, live a life haunted by shadows, or I could return. One day, the pull would be too strong to fight. One day, I would walk back into Raven Hollow willingly, carrying the stone, becoming a part of it, and joining those it had claimed before me. I don't know when that day will come, but I feel it growing stronger every time I close my eyes. The Appalachians are beautiful, majestic, inviting, but they are patient, and the patient always get what they want. I should have known something was off the moment I turned onto the gravel road that led to Black Pine Hollow. The locals in the tiny town nearby had avoided the topic when I asked about it, muttering that some places just aren't meant for visiting. I laughed it off. I was 29, experienced with camping, and had hiked deeper into the Appalachians than most people dared. A little local superstition wouldn't scare me. I arrived mid-afternoon, the sky streaked with pink and gold, and parked at a small pull-off near a creek. The forest was dense, the canopy thick, the air crisp and smelling faintly of wet leaves. I set up camp quickly, hoping to have time to explore before nightfall. My friend Tom was supposed to meet me the next day, so for now, I was completely alone. The first night passed quietly. I had a small fire, cooked a few sausages, and watched the sun dip below the mountains. Everything seemed perfect until I woke around midnight. At first, I thought it was the wind rattling the trees, but then I heard its soft, deliberate footsteps circling my tent. My stomach sank. "Tom," I whispered into the darkness, though I knew he wasn't here yet. No answer. I shined my flashlight into the trees. There was nothing, no deer, no human figure, but the sound continued, circling, brushing against the brush, quick and light. My hand shook. I considered running, but the forest was too dark, too dense to move blindly. I crawled back into my sleeping bag, trying to tell myself it was a dream, that I was imagining things. The next morning, the forest seemed heavier. The sunlight barely penetrated the canopy, and the creek that had run clear yesterday now looked darker, sluggish. I decided to hike along a faint trail to clear my head. It wasn't long before I noticed something strange. Footprints. Not deer or raccoon. Human, but elongated, narrow, and the toes curved unnaturally. They led deeper into the woods, then abruptly vanished. I returned to camp to find my backpack had been moved a few feet from where I left it. Nothing was missing, but the placement was enough to make me uneasy. I considered leaving, but pride, or stupidity, kept me from doing so. Tom arrived the next day, cheerful and oblivious to the tension in my face. He joked about my paranoia, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest itself was watching us, alive in a way that was intentional and patient. That night, we built a fire together and told stories. I tried to laugh, to feel safe with him there, but the shadows beyond the firelight seemed thicker than normal. And then we heard it, a low hum, resonating through the earth beneath our feet. Not wind, not animal, but something older, something deliberate. "What is that?" Tom asked, his voice unusually quiet. "I don't know," I admitted. "I think it's coming from the woods." The whispers followed, faint at first, almost like the rustling of leaves. Then they grew louder, forming sounds that could almost be words. Stay, follow, see. My pulse quickened. We decided to hike toward the source, reasoning that it might be another hiker or a strange natural formation. The trail twisted and turned in ways that didn't make sense. Landmarks we had passed earlier were gone, replaced by dense thickets and fallen trees. Even the creek had shifted. It was as if the forest itself had rearranged while we weren't looking. Eventually, we came upon a clearing that hadn't been on any map. In the center was a small stone circle, black and smooth, arranged like a primitive altar. The hum came from it, low and insistent. Shadows gathered at the edges of the clearing, elongated and stretching unnaturally. My stomach turned. Tom stepped forward, curiosity overtaking caution. I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I warned. But he didn't listen. The moment he touched one of the stones, the ground trembled and the forest around us seemed to breathe. Trees bent inward, shadows pooled thick and black, and the whispers coalesced into a single voice, repeating, "Join. See. Become." The shapes moved closer. They weren't human, but they weren't animals either. Limbs bent impossibly, heads tilted at unnatural angles, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. I tried to pull Tom back, but he froze, staring into the darkness, eyes wide, unblinking. I panicked and ran, diving into the undergrowth. The shadows followed, pressing against me, tugging at my body. Somehow, I found myself back at the creek near our campsite. Tom was gone. The stone circle had vanished. The forest seemed calm again, ordinary even. I searched for him for hours, but there was no trace. The footprints were gone. The trees looked like they always had. By sunset, I accepted the grim truth. He was gone, claimed by whatever lived in the forest. I returned home, shaken and haunted. Nights are the worst. I dream of the stone circle, the shapes, and the whispers calling my name. Occasionally, I wake to find a shadow at the edge of my room, just beyond sight, watching. And sometimes when the wind blows from the mountains, I hear the faint hum of that altar beckoning me back. Weeks later, I found a small black stone in my pocket. I didn't remember taking it. It pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. When I held it, I could hear the whispers again, clearer now. Come, become. I realized then that the forest hadn't claimed Tom because it wanted him. It had claimed him because it knew I would come eventually. The Appalachian Mountains are beautiful, majestic, inviting, but they are patient. And patient things never forget, never release, and always wait for the next. One day I will return. I know it. And when I do, I won't fight. I've been dreaming of this trip for months. A weekend in the remote Appalachian backcountry, away from roads, towns, and anyone who might disturb the silence. My friend Eric and I had planned every detail, or so I thought. We parked at a small gravel pull-off and hiked in along a narrow trail that disappeared almost immediately into the dense forest. The sun was low, casting long shadows that danced like living things across the ground. We found a clearing near a creek, the perfect spot to set up our tent. The water babbled quietly, moss-coated every rock, and the forest seemed to inhale and exhale around us. I should have noticed the quiet was too complete. No birds, no insects, not even the occasional rustle of squirrels. Just stillness, thick and suffocating. The first night was uneventful, or so I thought. We built a fire, ate some canned chili, and joked about going off the grid in the middle of nowhere. The stars were bright, the kind you only see far from city lights. I fell asleep with the comforting murmur of the creek in my ears, but I woke hours later to the faintest whisper, like someone breathing my name from just beyond the firelight. "Eric," I whispered, shaking his shoulder. He mumbled something incoherent and turned over. I stared into the darkness. Nothing. No animal. No person. Nothing but the trees and the way the shadows seemed thicker than they should be. I told myself it was the wind, the old camping nerves, anything but what it felt like, being watched. Morning brought no relief. The trail we had used to reach the clearing seemed subtly changed. Rocks and fallen logs shifted. The creek had curved differently. My compass spun randomly. Our GPS had no signal. I realized with a chill that the forest was no longer the same forest we had entered. We decided to hike toward what we hoped was the main trail. Every step led us deeper into a part of the mountains I didn't recognize. Landmarks that had seemed familiar vanished, only to reappear twisted or in slightly different locations. Then we saw it, footprints. Long, thin, human-like, but elongated, with toes bent unnaturally. They led in a circle, then disappeared into the undergrowth. By nightfall, we were lost, exhausted, and increasingly panicked. The whispers returned, louder now, circling us, forming syllables that almost sounded like words. Stay, follow, see. I wanted to flee, but my legs refused. We stumbled into a small clearing dominated by a massive, ancient oak. Around its base was a circle of black stones, slick and smooth, arranged like a primitive altar. The air was dense, smelling of iron and damp earth. The whispers seemed to emanate from the stones themselves, rising and falling, coaxing, tempting. "Don't touch it," I told Eric. He stepped forward anyway. The moment his fingers brushed a stone, the ground trembled. Shadows stretched along the forest floor, black and liquid, curling around us. The whispers joined into a chorus, repeating in unison. Come. See. Become. I tried to pull him back, but he froze, his eyes wide, blank, fixed on something I couldn't see. Shapes pressed against the trees, thin, distorted, bending limbs in impossible ways, eyes glowing faintly. The forest itself seemed alive, breathing, shifting to herding us into the center of the circle. Then, the strangest thing happened. Eric's form shimmered, like light through water, and then he was gone. Just gone. I fell to my knees, screaming, searching, but only silence answered, thick and heavy, pressing against my ears. I ran blindly, crashing through underbrush, tripping over roots, the whispers still calling. Somehow, I ended up back at the creek near our original campsite. It looked normal, peaceful, untouched. But Eric was gone, the stones had vanished, and the forest no longer seemed to shift, at least not visibly. I sat there until dawn, too afraid to move, replaying the night in my head. When I finally stumbled back to the main road, I called the local authorities. They found no trace of Eric, no footprints, no stones, no evidence that we had ever been in that hidden clearing. Even my gear showed no signs of struggle. Weeks later, I began noticing small things. Shadows moved slightly off from where they should. Reflections in windows sometimes showed a second figure behind me, one I knew wasn't there. And then the stone appeared. Black, smooth, cold, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. I never remembered picking it up, but there it was in my pocket, tethering me to the forest. I realized then the truth. The forest didn't want Eric. It wanted me. I had survived the night because it had tested me, probed my mind, assessed my fear. And now, with the stone in my hand, I belonged to it, whether I admitted it or not. The pull is growing stronger every day. When I sleep, I dream of the clearing, the whispers, and Eric's blank eyes, staring from the shadows. And one night, I know I will follow them willingly, not as a victim, but as the next caretaker of that place. Another shadow in the Appalachian wilderness, patient, eternal, and waiting. The mountains are beautiful, majestic, inviting, but they are patient, and the patient always get what they want. I had always thought the Appalachian Mountains were more myth than menace. Growing up in the city, I'd only seen them from postcards or in tourist brochures promising majestic trails and serene camping. But my best friend, Carter, had a way of convincing me that our lives were missing something if we didn't spend a weekend deep in the woods. That's how I found myself driving a beat-up Jeep into a stretch of forest no GPS would acknowledge, a place Carter swore was off the grid in all the right ways. We arrived as the sun was dipping behind the ridges, spilling long, twisting shadows across the pine-scented trails. The air smelled like damp earth and the sharp tang of pine resin, the kind that makes your lungs tingle the first time you breathe it in. We parked near a clearing Carter had picked out, the one that opened to a creek barely wide enough to step across. He claimed it was the perfect spot, secluded, scenic, and, he said with a grin, just wild enough to make us remember we're alive. The first night was unremarkable, at least as unremarkable as camping in the middle of nowhere can be. We built a fire, roasted some frankfurters, and traded stories about past hikes gone wrong. Carter's stories were always dramatic, bordering on absurd, but I laughed along, the kind of laughter that felt easier when surrounded by the comforting glow of firelight. The stars above were brighter than anything I'd ever seen, and I fell asleep feeling a calm I hadn't realized I was craving. I woke just after midnight, not to the sound of animals, but to something else. At first, I couldn't place it, low, almost imperceptible, like a whisper carried on the wind. But it was there, persistent, a barely there rasp that seemed to float between the trees. I nudged Carter awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. He rolled over, squinting through the firelight. "Hear what?" "That whispering." "I don't know. Sounds like someone talking." Carter laughed softly, though his eyes were sharp in the firelight. "It's the woods talking. They do that sometimes. Just wind through the leaves, man." I wanted to believe him, but the sound grew. Not the wind. It wasn't random rustling or the distant hoot of an owl. It was deliberate, something dragging itself across the ground, low and steady, almost like footsteps, but they were wrong. Too many of them, too measured, too quiet. I tried to wake up fully, to convince myself it was nothing, but the whispers started forming words. I swear they did. They were low, guttural, and distant, repeating a phrase I couldn't understand. I shook my head. "Carter, this isn't the wind," I murmured. He froze, listening. Then he nodded slowly, a look I didn't recognize on his face. "Maybe we should check it out. Just a quick look." I protested. The rational part of me screamed to stay in the tent, to ignore whatever it was. But Carter, as always, had this stubborn streak that I could never overcome. Before I knew it, we were both stepping into the dark, guided by nothing but our headlamps. The forest changed at night. In the daylight, it had seemed friendly, welcoming even. But in the dark, the trees closed in like towering, silent watchers. The whispers were clearer now, surrounding us from every angle. They weren't English words, but they had rhythm, cadence, intent. They weren't just sounds, they were invitations. And then I saw the first mark. A tree about 20 feet from us had deep gouges carved into its bark, vertical, jagged, as if something had scratched at it with claws. The smell hit me before I saw it. Iron, raw and metallic like blood, but old, almost dry. Carter was silent, staring at it, his face pale in the headlamp glow. What made this?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to the ground. There, embedded in the moss, were footprints. They were unlike any human footprints I've ever seen. Elongated, narrow, with toes that ended in sharp points. They didn't look natural. They led deeper into the woods, winding around trees in impossible patterns, as if the creature that made them could appear and disappear at will. Against my better judgment, Carter followed them. I had no choice but to go after him. Every step into the darkness made the whispers louder, closer. The air grew colder, the kind of bone-chilling cold that seeps through your clothes and sinks into your chest. My flashlight flickered, briefly revealing shapes moving between the trees. Shadows that weren't shadows. Eyes that reflected light too brightly, then vanished. We stopped at a small clearing where the moonlight touched the forest floor. There was a circle of stones in the center, blackened with soot. Around it, more symbols were carved into the surrounding trees. I recognized some as ancient, the kind of runes associated with old Appalachian folklore, warnings, curses, rites. Carter's jaw went tight. He whispered, "This isn't right. We shouldn't be here." Then it happened. The whispers stopped. Silence, sudden and complete, pressing against our ears and chest. And from that silence, a sound, a low, guttural growl, deep and resonant, coming from behind us. Something moved in the shadows, impossibly fast, circling us, sniffing the air like a predator. My gut dropped. I realized with horror that we were not alone. Not human, not animal. Something else, something older than the mountains themselves. Carter grabbed my arm. "Run." We bolted, crashing through underbrush, stumbling over roots and rocks, the darkness swallowing us whole. Behind us, the thing followed, silent at first, then with a wet, dragging sound that made my stomach turn. I dared to glance back once and saw nothing. Then a shadow darted, impossibly tall, its limbs bending at unnatural angles. We ran until we could no longer hear it. Or maybe it stopped, waiting. Either way, we collapsed near a creek, gasping for air. Our flashlights flickered, revealing the forest in ghostly silver. Carter's hand shook as he checked our packs. Nothing was missing, but I knew, somewhere in those woods, something had been watching, learning. The rest of that weekend was a blur of exhaustion and fear. We didn't sleep. We didn't explore. We packed our things at first light and left, vowing never to return. But even now, months later, I can't stop thinking about the sounds in those woods. The whispers, the eyes, the footprints that didn't belong to any animal I know. And sometimes when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear that voice again calling me back.
Thanks for listening, my friends. More true horror is coming. Just like, comment, and subscribe.